Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Economic Development. Does he agree with the Sydney Morning Herald headline, NZ wage gap with Australia widens?
The Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, I don't have an opinion on Australian newspapers' headline.
The Honourable David Parker.
Supplementary. Well then, does he agree with Claire Trevor of the Dominion Post, who said of his performance yesterday, and I quote, "The statistics proved him wrong, no matter how they were presented"?
The Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
No. And I can do no better than to quote the World Bank, who makes a comment about these things, and says basically that there are two ways in which those stats can be calculated, but the method chosen by the member is, if I may quote, unreliable, likely to lead to unreliable and misleading results.
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, this member has chosen no method in this question time today, and to rely on saying that the method chosen by that member, when I think the Dominion and the Sydney Morning Herald have been quoted, I think is misleading the House.
Well, no, we wouldn't go that far, but I do accept that the Minister was introducing unnecessary information in answering the question asked, and strictly that shouldn't be done. The Honourable David Parker.
Will the Minister now announce measurable interim targets to close the wage gap with Australia so that New Zealanders can hold National accountable for its election promise?
The Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, I fully accept that the nation will hold National accountable for its election promise, just as they did the Labour Party, who promised to get New Zealand into the top half of the OECD, but failed to do so during their 9-year term.
The Honourable David Parker.
If the government will not give New Zealanders those milestones, will he at least give a date by which the New Zealand-Australian wage gap will reduce to what it was at the last election?
The Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, I believe that the very extensive economic development program that the government has put in place will see those results available to New Zealanders very, very soon.
The Honourable David Parker.
Why can the Minister not see that his unwillingness to agree to any milestone for closing the gap before 2025, plus his refusal today to even give a target date to get back to where we were at the election, makes a mockery of National's central election promise to close the wage gap?
The Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, the first point I'd make is that New Zealand has been on a track of a widening gap between New Zealand workers' wages and Australian workers' wages for over 2 decades. Mr Speaker, I think to have expected that we would be putting in milestones just 18 months into our program is completely unreasonable. I know that New Zealanders do understand that we are engaged in a comprehensive relook at the New Zealand economy, where we are expecting the growth to occur that will deliver higher incomes.
The Honourable David Parker.
If the Minister is not willing to give any target date to reach the interim target for closing the gap, will he at least come to the House and give a date when he expects the gap will stop growing wider?
The Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, I think it's very unwise for the Labour Party to mention anything to do with closing the gaps. That was one of their targets. It was also spectacularly a failure for them. Mr Speaker, the government is engaged in an extensive program to encourage growth in the New Zealand economy, and New Zealand workers will feel that effect in due course.
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr Speaker, I think that was a tight question. I know that you won't insist on a yes or a no, but the question, I think in summary,
in the interest of saving time, what I'd like to is invite the Honourable David Parker to repeat his question, because I must confess I did not hear a lot of answer to it.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
David Parker.
If the Minister is not willing to give any interim targets as to the date by which the gap will close, is he at least willing to come to the House and give a date when the gap's going to stop getting wider?
Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, the two questions are simply the reverse of each other. I've already answered the question in that regard.
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr. Speaker, saying that I already answered that, I think used to be allowed in this House. I don't think it is now, unless it's obvious to all members. And sir, I without bringing you into the debate, I could see from the height of your eyebrows, which were nearly as high as mine, that you didn't understand the answer as members over here didn't.
It's today's been interesting question time with points of order around the adequacy of answers, and I've ruled on a couple of occasions that some ministers don't have responsibility for certain things. But on this occasion, this minister has made statements about closing the gap with Australia, and the question did ask whether the minister would be prepared to come back to the House to tell the House when the gap would stop increasing. Now, the minister could say he's not prepared to, he is prepared to, would be an answer. But to say nothing related to it is hardly an answer. And actually, I think, this is an issue of public interest. I wouldn't mind hearing an answer, the Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
I'll give that some consideration.
Question number 11, Heke Parata.